Yeah, this has been being negotiated for 8 years. It started just after Brexit that they started these talks. And as you mentioned, they broke down back in 2023 over this question of beef imports. The EU right now is pretty spooked by the farmers' protests against the Merosur trade deal. That's the free trade deal that's been struck with South American countries. One of the controversial elements of that is beef being exported from South America to the EU and fears that it would flood the market. Now, Australia wanted a 50,000-ton preferential quota on beef. The EU said that was too high, and so the talks broke down. The EU was also asking for geographical indicators and for emergency brake clauses that Australia didn't like. Essentially, why this trade deal has happened today is that Australia relented, that Australia gave in, and they've accepted a 30,000-ton preferential quota that's being divided into duty-free for grass-fed beef imports up to a certain amount, and 7.5% tariff for conventional beef imports. Also, they've accepted a 25,000-ton preferential quota on sheep meat and an autonomous safeguard clause that's similar to what the EU has inserted into the Mercosur deal to try to calm the anger of farmers. So if Australian products started flooding the EU market, they could shut off the trade deal essentially in an emergency way. Now, I mentioned that this started being negotiated immediately after Brexit. The UK actually struck its own trade deal with Australia very shortly after Brexit. So you might ask, what's the difference between these two trade deals? Well, the EU's trade deal is much more protected. For the UK, it was very important politically to have a fast win after Brexit. And critics of the UK-Australia deal say that Australia really won that trade deal, that the UK accepted unfair terms. They didn't put protections in for their own markets because it was so important to get that deal done quickly. The EU did this more slowly, and they used their size and their power. And in the end, Australia accepted the conditions that the EU was attached. Now, if you're a big pro-free trader, you would say, no, it was more important to have maximum free trade and have this struck the fastest as possible. But people on the other side of the argument would say, in the long run, the EU is better off here because they got the protections in there that they wanted, which the UK wasn't able to get. I should still caution that this is just the signature of the deal, this deal's final text. This still needs to be ratified by the European Parliament and by national governments. And as we saw with Mercosur, that can prove tricky.
Well, at least they got there in the end, I suppose, Dave. I mean, what are the two sides then hoping to get out of it?
Well, as you heard from that soundbite from Ursula von der Leyen, she's very much presenting this as the EU's push to open new trade routes now that they're facing risks from China and also a deterioration with their relationship with the United States. So the Commission says that this will save EU companies €1 billion per year and boost EU-Australia trade by 30% within the next decade. EU-Australia trade is right now €37 billion for goods and €31 billion for services. But critically, this deal also gives the EU to critical raw materials. Those are the minerals that make up our smartphones, our electronics, lots of elements of our daily life, which the EU just does not have. It doesn't have under the soil here. It can't mine it. That's something that Australia has plentifully. And right now it's been selling it a lot to China. The EU wants a more stable agreement with Australia to get those critical raw materials. So the EU says that this deal will eliminate export taxes on those raw materials. It will also make the market more stable and predictable. But of course, that Australia didn't completely give in here because Australia was able to successfully insert the ability to charge foreign buyers more than it charges its domestic companies. That's something the EU wanted to get out of the final text here, but it is in the final text. So Australia did get that in there. But as I say, this is all being presented as part of this push for the EU to establish new trading partners now that it is losing its relationship with the United States.
Dave, thanks very much. Dave Keating, our correspondent, talking to us live there from Brussels.